Hello, welcome to this edition of the BioStock Live featuring Acarix. Today we're welcoming Per Persson, the CEO of the company, who's here to tell us more about the company and their product, the CADScor system. Welcome, Per, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Michael. It's a great pleasure to be here and have the opportunity to share any information and updates about Acarix. First, I want to take the opportunity to give you a little bit of background of the company for the people who are not aware and have a deeper knowledge about Acarix. The company was founded in 2004, and it's an innovation coming from one of the universities in Aarhus in Denmark. And we have made a very exciting journey over the time in the overall development, and of course we're grateful for all the financial support that has been brought to that way. In 2016, we put the company in the market at the IPO, and I would say that the real commercial journey and the opportunities that we're learning right now is coming from the time from 2019 and onwards. Just a few words about the company itself. We're a company that currently have it's a one product company. We have the CADScor system and the related patches that are for single use only. And what we really do is that we have a diagnostic aid that helps you really follow an accurate rule out and find patients that are suffering from a potential coronary artery disease. The system itself is built on an algorithm, and what we really do is that we translate the acoustics of the blood into a signal, and then we report that on the screen that is defining the patient's risk of coronary artery disease. And you can find videos really describing the system itself on our website. Now, the big question is, so why would you come with a system that can help rule out cardiovascular disease? The main reason is that we all know that the #1 killer still globally is the cardiovascular disease. And we also know that this is a market that is steadily growing, even if it's been addressed and a little bit improved by the knowledge and understanding of the impacting factors. What people might not know is that when you look at all of the patients that are searching any healthcare professional because they're suffering from coronary artery disease, or they are led to believe that they're suffering from coronary vessel disease, they actually do not suffer from it. We have an enormous amount of patients that will actually show up at the healthcare service providers in order to have an investigation. And we know that about 90% of those patients have other issues that relates to their problem coming to see them. It can be related to stress, it can be related to burnout syndrome, it can be related to infections and other things. So what we really try to do is to help to rule out those patients at the very early stage. The sooner we identify those patients, the more capacity we can free up for the more advanced and comprehensive investigation for the patient. We have, over the last year and a half, been presenting a very steady and consistent flow of our objectives in what we would like to achieve as a company. The focus is really, since we got the FDA approval, the development of the US market, continue the journey that we're doing in a few selected markets in Europe. Of course, the backbone of our organization has always been the clinical evidence, and we're going to continue to invest and create a strong story there. And then, of course, we need to do what is required in terms of consistently upgrade our product offering towards the market needs. Today, I actually wanted to focus a little bit more on the current status of where we are in the US, and then a little bit about the update on the situation about reimbursement in Germany. Starting with the US, the market is of course well aware of the great news that we obtained our FDA approval at the very end of last year in November, and this was based on our de novo submission. So we're very proud and excited about having that opportunity to move that forward. We have, and we started with that in parallel, of course started to look at what is the reimbursement strategy going to look like. How are we actually going to get access to payment coverage in the US market? This is, and it will be, a long journey. But the way we have identified it right now is that we're going to start working with what they call a CPT3 coding that we think can give us a little bit of a quicker access. And we have already engaged and prepared, so we're going to have presentations for the ACC, that is one of the coding work groups in the US, in May. And then we have a few other meetings already set up also in the first half of the year. So the process is going to be long, but we have started and we're well advanced, and we have connected to the network in order to have the meetings and get the structure moving forward. The other thing we also noted when we got the FDA approval, we were also telling the market that there are a few adjustments that we need to do on the product performance device just to fit into the US market. What we did a few software upgrades, and we have been working with the translations and the overall adopting for the IFUs and the messaging overall in the US. And we also said that we would be ready with this platform in April, and that's where we are. So we're actually ready now to start any potential evaluations assessment when we get that set up in the US market. Then of course we have an ongoing process, as we have been speaking about before, about really finding a good and solid partner, and it could be one or more that could help us have a geographical coverage over the entire US. But of course we have also been pinpointing and looking at which regions would be the benefit for the most prevalence of coronary artery disease. So all those things are currently ongoing. Of course the pandemic situation, which has so far not been damaging us that much, but it makes it more difficult for us because we can, for obvious reasons, not spend a lot of time in the US. So a lot of discussions, a lot of work we're doing, we're actually forced to do it through various opportunities in terms of Teams meetings. But hopefully at some point in time in the summer we will actually be able to go and see people and have all the dynamics back in the normal relation towards the building the market. So the next thing that I like to address is the situation on the GBA situation with the reimbursement in Germany. And we started with a submission in 2018. And just as a reference, very often when you start a reimbursement process in Germany, we can speak about the lifetime or a time requirement of 6 to 8 years. We started in 2018 and fairly soon at the early parts of 2019 with the new changes of the authorities in Germany, we actually had to change our strategy and start working towards, let's say, the original pathway, which is GBA. So we did our resubmission in the first quarter of 2019. And since then, we've had a very good and consistent relation and discussions together with the GBA. The process in itself is still following all the normal instances that you would see for the German approval process. What happened was that we got in the later part of 2020, we actually got the recognition of CADScor as a technology with the acoustic benefits. And this is actually something that was recognized both by FDA in the US and by our authorities in Germany, really stating that this is such an innovation that we actually need to create new codes and new pathways for this technology towards the market. We were then invited to a hearing, and that actually took place last week, where there was a group of experts from various impact makers in Germany, together with people from Acarix. And the main topic of that discussion was really to find what would be the best comparative testing in order to really identify the potential of any acoustic technology for the German market. The direction from that discussion is that we, together with GBA, there is certainly identified a need of performing a study locally in Germany. And we are really just trying to nail down the first part of what that protocol would look like. The timing, the terms and condition of this will still be determined. We expect to hear back from GBA. We had a meeting last week and we actually expect to hear back from them in a couple of weeks. But of course, the timing on when this is actually going to start happening, that's going to be determined in the discussion with GBA. From a cost perspective, it's also important that there are 3 different ways to play this scenario out in Germany. It would either be paid by the company itself, so by Acarix. It could be paid by a third party, like a sponsor coming in from the outside that sees the interest of developing this in the market, or it will be covered by GBA itself, as they see this as a very innovative and interesting technology to assess for the German market. So still a very active and very, very exciting discussion ongoing with the German authorities. With regards to the clinical program, you probably saw that yesterday we announced that we now got a formal acceptance of the prognostic study. The prognostic now gives us 7 years data on the performance of the CADScor system, and it's coming from a subset analysis from the DANICAD-1 study. We also announced the SEISMO study, and SEISMO in a way it's a very exciting segment in itself, because here we are speaking about heart failure. And heart failure, as you might remember from previous presentations, is really focusing on a new way of applying the same algorithm and technology that we're using for the CADScor in order to identify heart failure patient at a very early stage. We are right now looking at what kind of extensions we need to be completing that study to actually use that for further development of the product in itself. And it's really also very active and a very exciting long-term opportunity for Acarix as a company. And then you're all aware of the filter study that we started last year, where we have now 5 sites enrolling patients, And it's really the study where we're looking at a decisive result when you put CAT score as an alternative to any other diagnostics in the assessment of coronary artery disease for the patients. So also a very exciting and strong clinical program that we really continue to pursue. Finally, if you look at this slide, it's a little bit of a busy slide, but in a way I think it's really echoing and comparing the statements I've been making that 2021 is going to be a very exciting year for Acarix. And we are of course focusing on the commercial development for the US market. We are looking at when we're actually going to have the reimbursement coming on board and that process around that. We also have, of course, the registries that we are planning to do in the US. All that is in the US focus. Then, as I mentioned, the heart failure itself is a longer term development, but that's of course something where we need to get the activities and dynamics in place so we can actually follow this on a development journey for us. And then part of this, the reimbursement journey that we have been mentioning, both for the US, for the German market, for the UK market, coming our way. And then in addition, of course, we have the opportunity to start looking at alternative markets for us, because we have been really keeping us focused on a few markets, which was really part of our strategy. But of course, there is Italy, Spain, France, Netherlands, etc. Markets that in the right priorities is going to help us to continue to expand and scale up Acarix as a company. So finally, why would 2021 be such an exciting year for Acarix? Well, first of all, the US entry in itself, the achievement of the FDA approval and the opportunity that we have to actually develop and drive in the world's largest medical device market is of course an opportunity in itself. Then as mentioned, the reimbursement and also the commercial development in Germany. As I have been alluding to previously, we have done changes 1.5 years ago in terms of the setup of the organization in Germany. And as you have seen in our recent quarterly reports, we actually start to see a good momentum in Germany with that new team in place and doing the right things with the right focus and target groups. Clinical programs and of course the health economic paper submission that I mentioned before. We have put that all together. We are ready now to make that submission into NICE, and that will actually give us access to continued discussion for coverage in the UK market as well. Finally, the Acarix organization and the opportunity we have of developing partnership has really been setting up the tone for what we think we can achieve in 2021 in itself. That's all from me now, and thank you very much for your attention. Over to you, Michael.
Well, thank you so much, Per, for the presentation. I just wanted to start, you mentioned that the CAT score system has received market approval from the FDA. It's obviously a huge step forward for the development. Could you tell us more about the implications of this approval and the overall strategy for market penetration in the US?
Absolutely. We, in a way, when we started with submission towards the FDA approval, we first used the 510K, which is a very normal way where you find a comparative device that you're actually using. We then got the recommendation from FDA that we actually follow the de novo pathway, which meant that they were actually going to look at the clinical data that we have developed in Europe. And in order to make all that happen, we of course have to put our priorities in the right direction, which meant that we had to focus on the submission and taking us through the regulatory pathways in order to get the approval, which means that we then have to start with the investment from a commercial approach has actually been starting more recent after the approval in itself. So right now it's really to continue, as I mentioned, to develop and find out what is the best and fastest way for us in terms of reimbursement, to keep going with identifying commercial partner. And as I mentioned before, we're actually using an agency that is really developing a shortlist and representing us in the initial discussions. And then of course, once there is an interest, we will actually connect and take that discussions further. So that's really the plan on how to get there. Then in parallel, we also need to start to get a little bit of a, let's say, clinical experience in the US. So that's also part. Now when we have the device ready for being brought into the US market, we also start to look for which clinic can actually start to doing the first patient and get a little bit of a local experience in the US.
You mentioned this clinical experience in the US. Do you have a timeline for that? I know it's hard to say, obviously, with the pandemic and all that going on, but...
No, it's absolutely fine. I mean, we have the ambition. The ambition is that now we have systems that we can actually bring over to the US. We have a few clinics where we have an active discussions, but I would say that from a practical and pragmatic perspective, papers, committees and everything in place, I would probably not see any larger scales trials or even site assessment going on until after the summertime. like you said, the pandemic situation is actually not stopping us from getting devices and doing that. It's more of a problem in having people there to train and do hands-on together with the physicians, and that is going to be so important for us in the first exposures we have.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you also mentioned partnering opportunities. Would you like to expand on that maybe a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. So the way we look at this is that to build our own sales organization, it goes without saying, a population of 350 million people and a market to cover that would be larger to one extent than Europe. We're not going to go with our own sales organization initially. So what we are looking for is partnerships, either in terms of a pure distributor setup, so someone who's importing, taking the device to the market and using their own sales organization and bring the sales moving. The second opportunity would of course to be find over one of the more established industrial players today, have a dialogue and see if we would actually fit into their offering, and by doing that we would actually have a different kind of setup in terms of industrial partnership. But I have nothing concrete that I can share with the market here and now.
Yeah, sure. And you also mentioned expanding into other markets besides the US, Germany, the UK. Is there one in particular that you're eyeing at this moment?
Well, UK, of course, because we have started our journey in the UK and we actually have a few commercial systems there already. But we also need to make sure that we have, let's say, the supportive data behind us in order to take that to the next step. We have, in parallel, we have actually developed, the software and the instructions for use, etc., in Italian, Spanish, Dutch, and French. And so, of course, there are a few markets that we have pinpointed that we're really looking at, and we've had a few contacts with, potential distributor partners in those markets.
Well, great. Well, thank you so much for joining us again today for your presentation, and we hope to see you again here soon.
Thank you.